Hey, yo, what up? This is Mark from the Mark Digital Live podcast, produced by Feltzine. I just want to let y'all know, if you really want to support us and keep this shit going, please subscribe and rate this on Apple Podcasts. Like us on Spotify if you're listening on Spotify. If you're on Spotify, also just go ahead and search for Feltzine and find our playlist and like that shit too, so you can keep up with all these updates, the music, and the podcast. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Feltzine. That's at Feltzine. You can also find us on Facebook with that same address, Feltzine. Facebook.com/Feltzine. However the fuck you use Facebook. Who even knows anymore? You can also please join our Discord. You can find the Discord link in any one of these podcasts. So if you're listening and you want to join the conversation, if you want to hear it live, if you just want to chat with us about shit, or if you want to ask us a question about the podcast or submit a question or a topic, just come through the Discord and do that. Join us over there. You could also find me at MarkDigitalHD on Twitter and Instagram. So go ahead and follow me there. And yo, thank you for listening. This is the Mark Digital Live podcast. Peace. One of my favorite characters, I guess we can call it that, because these are all stories. One of my favorite characters in Greek mythology is the god Dionysus. He is the god of wine, winemaking, grapes, grape cultivation, all that sort of stuff. Also, the god of fertility and theater, religious ecstasy, and ritual madness. The Romans called him Bacchus. I'm really interested in this combination between wine and this idea that ties it to madness and ecstasy, or religious ecstasy. But, you know, we could even just go ahead and just say ecstasy. And to me, this combination of ecstasy and madness sort of, in my mind, merged to become intoxication. So, the god Dionysus, or as the Greeks would have called him, or Bacchus as the Romans would have called him, is a really interesting figure to me, because the more that I study Greek mythology, the more that I start to understand that what Dionysus was also standing for was a certain type of freedom and a certain type of anarchy that was separate from the traditional order of the, let's say, status quo. And that in a lot of ways Dionysus is really a figure for that. Dionysus is really a figure for free thinking. Dionysus is really a figure for radicalism and for a sort of positive anarchy. The reason I say this is because Bacchus had the Maenads, right? Which were these women who would fall into his what the Greeks would call madness, and would pretty much tear through the countryside, literally tearing apart cows with their bare hands, and just tearing apart livestock, sometimes even killing people. But they were seen as being mad. This mad group of women that would follow him, really entranced in his powers of intoxication. But the one thing that I find interesting about this, and I think a lot of the lens that people have kind of taken this to be, is a certain sort of disorder, a certain sort of scariness. They've used this to be a warning against drinking and against being intoxicated, which I think is completely wrong. And the reason is because of this. Dionysus, Bacchus, he was a god. And as a god, he was born directly from Zeus. Not all of the gods were, not all of the children of Zeus were able to become gods. That's part of it, right? And I mean, in the sense that they were able to join Mount Olympus and stuff like that. So really, one of the few people that are even on this level is like Hercules, right? So Dionysus is the equivalence of a Herculean figure. What we start to have then is this sort of situation where I think that a lot of the interpretation of Bacchus has come from people who have studied this and written about it who are very sexist. And, I mean, of course, Greek mythology in itself and these stories and these narratives do inherently have a lot of sexism within them. However, I think that there's even more sexism and updated sexism that is sort of seen through these lenses when we think about these stories. And with that, I wouldn't say that these women were going mad or going crazy in their intoxication. I think it's actually the opposite. I think their intoxication was their freedom, right? And so in a society where women can't have anything, women are nothing but property to the men in their lives, the fact that they could join the cult of Dionysus means that now they have freedom. They have the ability to roam on their own. And damn it, if the idea of women having freedom and autonomy over their own bodies is scary to niggas who exist today, can you imagine what that shit was like for motherfuckers in ancient Athens? And even, you know what I'm saying? Like, even in ancient Rome, like, these people were so afraid of the idea of women being free. And I'm especially sure that when the Romans went back and reinterpreted it, they added even more fear into those kind of stories. Don't be like those women. Don't be like the free women who are intoxicated, right? And I think a lot of these kind of bedrocks, that the sort of kind of structural kind of support that these Greek myths give to all of Western society, which I live in Western society, so these things are extremely important to me, right? These are the bedrocks that even created the values of Christianity at the end of the day. Because a lot of these things get blended in and get turned into what we have, right? Regardless of how you start to look at the genealogy of these ideas. And with that, all of this goes to show that anytime that there were women that had the opportunity to express themselves and exercise any sort of freedoms, this is how they were treated. They were treated as if they were mad. And this still happens today, right? If a woman kind of just wants to live her own life, doesn't want to be limited by what people want her to be limited by, is not necessarily trying to be told what to do by some man, they're seen as crazy. They're seen as problematic. They're seen as intoxicated. And so we have to look at that and start to understand the idea of wine also, right? Dionysus being the god of wine. That was even the idea of saying wine. Wine is a stand-in for any sort of intoxicating, heavily intoxicating drug, right? Wine could be a psychedelic. Wine could be weed. Wine could be pills. The reason why this is kind of used in this way is because all they had was wine, right? Like, all they had was wine that could get you lit. Dionysus was more so the god of being lit and intoxicated than he was, like, particularly the god of wine itself. And so I think that starts to kind of show this natural link between a penchant to want to be healthily intoxicated, especially with a nod toward freedom, right? So I think that we could even start to think about someone like Hunter S. Thompson, who was a journalist who was... Sorry about that. So we can think about this and think about someone like Hunter S. Thompson, right? Who was a journalist and thinker who created all sorts of new types of journalism, but was definitely deeply interested in exploring his mind using psychedelic drugs while simultaneously thinking of ways that he could free society and culture from being stuck, right? From kind of thinking inside boxes. And as a free thinker and as someone who was willing to challenge all of the evils that happen in politics and in the government, I think that there's an important link there between that and his heavy drug use. And I think that a lot of people who are seeking freedom and who are seeking a way to be able to think beyond the structures that have been forced upon them happen to turn to drugs. And they do so because there is a sort of freedom in being intoxicated. I think that even this whole idea of microdosing, right, especially microdosing something like mushrooms, and the people who have kind of studied these things, so people like James Fadiman, like they've done a lot of this work that's really made people kind of sit back and say, okay, wow, like, there's actually something here that that's not a total joke, right? It's not just about, hippies or wild ass people in California just wanting to get high and totally tune out of society. And their research has actually shown that all of these people who have kind of been mocked in those ways, they weren't tripping. They were right. You know what I'm saying? Like, people who were taking their shroom trips and having their third eye open up and kind of seeing all the conspiracies out there and all that shit, even though it might not have the best ways to be communicated for people to take it serious, it's happening. And the ideas that are reflected in a lot of the things that they talk about can actually be scientifically proven. And people like Michael Pollan, right, who's one of our greatest thinkers of today, right, probably one of our best sociologists, psychologists, one of the smartest people who's kind of thinking about the environment, right? Michael Pollan is a big proponent of microdosing, of taking drugs, of microdosing psychedelics in order to think better, to think clearer, to think freer. So if we kind of just take a moment to just actually recognize that there is this connection, right, between drugs and freedom, between intoxication and freedom. Like, think about this. Like, what is the thing that has impacted the lives most of people of color, especially black and brown people, pretty much globally? The drug war, right? The war on drugs, especially since, the late 70s, early 80s. It's been the war on drugs. That's been the thing that destroyed the black community in America. It's destroyed Mexico. It's made Mexico pretty much a narco state. That's not the cartel's fault, right? Drugs aren't expensive because of the cartels. Drugs are expensive because of the war on drugs, because they're a banned item. So this is a whole game that people are playing with freedom. And these people are politicians, right? These people use our tax money to then police us, taking away our freedoms and pointing the whole need to militarize every single police force in this country comes from trying to fight a drug war, trying to fight the freedom, the mental freedom that people can have. That's the biggest thing that they fear, is the actual self-actualization and realization of freedom, which drugs can help speed up exponentially. I want to end this thinking about a story that I have of a coworker of mine who adopted a child. This child was kind of being like a little problematic for some time. The child didn't really want to pay attention in school, and even at one point told their mother that they hated school. And this woman was devastated because she is very into education and feels like, education is a key way for anyone to succeed, which is a very common thought. Recently I kind of just asked how the child was doing, and I checked up on her, and it turned out the child was doing incredible, right? And the mother pretty much said, quote, "Thank God for Adderall. It solved all of our problems." Now she loves school. Now this little girl is getting straight A's. This little girl has now a happiness that she never knew that she had, because she's able to focus in the ways that she needs to focus. She's able to use her mind in the ways that actually benefit her and bring her the sort of inevitable success that also brings along with it self-worth and happiness that every little girl in the world deserves to have every day. So when we kind of blink, and that's just one legal drug, right? And this is why at some point we just have to accept that all drugs should be made legal. What I put into my body is my business. And the ways that I want to accelerate my mental journey and understanding should be left for me to decide how I want to do that. And fuck it, if I want to shoot some junk up my veins, I should be able to do that. And the more fake laws we put around this shit, the more problems that we just create for our own society. Because we are limiting freedoms. And we can't stop the god Dionysus' power. You're going against a god, y'all. You don't want to do that.